Hey guys, I'm still pretty fired up after Act 1, Scene 1, so we're gonna keep going. Keep up the momentum. Act 1, Scene 2. Alright, so we're gonna switch gears a little bit. We're not on the battlement anymore. Now we're going inside the castle, inside Elsinore. We're gonna meet the king. Not the dead king, not King Hamlet. Oh no. We're about to meet Claudius. King Claudius. King Claudius is Hamlet's uncle, brother to King Hamlet. Claudius married King Hamlet's wife, who is Hamlet's mother. It's like a bad Springer episode, but that's what happens. So King Claudius is actually Hamlet's uncle and now his stepdaddy. Uncle stepdaddy, Claudius. Then we meet Queen Gertrude. Then we meet Polonius, Laertes, Voltimand, Cornelius, lords, and attendants. Polonius is really the only heavy hitter besides Laertes. But Polonius is the king's wingman. But Polonius is like a snoopy little rat. Like he's always in everybody's business, so he's he's always sneaking around and trying to get in all their business, and he's the worst. And then there's Laertes, who is Polonius' son. We'll find out more about him later. Alright, so let's start this. Act 1, Scene 2, Elsinore, a room of state in the castle. So basically we're inside the castle and the king is meeting with all of these people. In the film that I want you guys to watch, it's set up kind of like a party. So, whatevs. Alright, king. So he's addressing everybody. Though of yet Hamlet, our dear brother's death, the memory be green. So he's talking about King Hamlet. And he says the memory be green, which means it's still fresh. We're going to find out how fresh that memory is in a bit. And that it us be fitted to bear our hearts in grief, and our whole kingdom to be contracted in one brow of woe. Yet so far hath discretion fought with nature, that we with wisest sorrow think on him, together with remembrance of ourselves. So he's saying with one brow of woe we can be sad, but we have another brow. And he's saying that it is wise to mourn those, but it is also important for us to remember ourselves, remember the responsibilities that we have. So he's like, yes, people die, things pass, but we cannot just grieve our lives away. We have to remember our responsibilities and start taking charge. So then he looks at his new wife and goes, therefore our sometime sister, as in sister-in-law, now our queen, the imperial jointress to this warlike state, have we, as 'twere with a defeated joy, with an auspicious, and one drooping eye, so one sad eye, one happy eye, with mirth in funeral, and with dirge in marriage. So he's drawing a contrast. So he's saying happiness in death and sadness in marriage. But because the funeral of King Hamlet has come so quickly, well, the marriage has come so quickly upon the death of King Hamlet, these two have gotten married very swiftly. Like, the king is not yet cold. It was a swift marriage. So, let's keep going. So he says, an equal scale weighing delight and dole. So he's like, at the same time, even though we're sad, we still need to be happy because I have taken to wife. Nor have we herein barred your better wisdoms, which have freely gone with this affair long, or all our thanks. Now follows that you know young Fortinbras. Now. So the very first part, he's like saying, okay, guys, I know we're still sad, but you need to get on board and be happy because we just had an awesome marriage and everything's fine. But now we need to get to business. We've got this Fortinbras thing happening, all right? So the king's about to announce to the kingdom, because remember, on the battlement, it was just like, spill the tea, tell us what you think is happening. Well, the king is about to really give us the whole story. So he says, now follows that you know young Fortinbras, holding a weak supposal of our worth. So the king is saying that Fortinbras must think that they are in a vulnerable state because their king has just died, right? Their king has just died. And so he's like, yeah, they think we're weak. They think we're sad. They think we're mourning. So now would be a great time to attack. He goes, they're thinking about our dear brother's death, our state to be disjoint and out of frame. So out of whack, that we're vulnerable. Colleagued with this dream of his advantage, he hath not failed to pester us with message. So evidently Fortinbras has sent Elsinore a message, importing the surrender of those lands lost by his father with all bonds of law to our most valiant brother. So basically Fortinbras was like, I want my land back now! Exclamation point. And then Uncle Stepdaddy's like, so much for him. Now for ourself and for this time of meeting, thus much the business is. And now he's going to tell us what he did. He's like, look, this is how I handled young Fortinbras. He says, we have here writ to Norway, uncle of young Fortinbras. So he's like, I'm not even going to address this little baby Fortinbras. I'm going to go straight to the uncle. So he sends the uncle a message. Now, sadly, the uncle is impotent and bedridden. Scarcely hears of this his nephew's purpose. So the uncle's old, he's sickly, but he's in charge. So King Claudius writes him a letter, and he's like, yo, your nephew's trying to start something he can't finish. Right? So I've sent a letter to suppress his further gait herein, to stop him from coming to Denmark, in that the levies, the lists, and full proportions are all made out of his subject. And we here dispatch you, good Cornelius, and you, Voltimand. So Cornelius and Voltimand are basically going to take this letter to Uncle Fortinbras, for bearers of this greeting to old Norway. Given to you no further personal power to business with the king more than the scope of these dilated articles allowed. So he's like, I'm sending you, Cornelius and Voltimand, but you're not allowed to do any dealings or negotiating. Just hand him the letter and bounce. So, farewell, and let your haste commend your duty. And then, of course, Cornelius and Voltimand, in that and all things we will show our duty. It's like, yes, king, whatever you want. And then we doubt it nothing, heartily farewell. So he dismisses them. And then he turns himself to Laertes. Now, on stage, Laertes is here, Hamlet is here. Etiquette would dictate that the king should address Hamlet first, because Hamlet is higher in the hierarchy. King Claudius doesn't do that. He addresses Laertes first, which is kind of a rub. Like, it's kind of like a So that's kind of, a little stab at Hamlet. So he looks to Laertes and he goes, and now, Laertes, what's the news with you? You told us of some suit. What is it, Laertes? So he's like, what do you want? What do you want to ask me? What do you need from me? And he goes, you cannot speak of reason to the Dane and lose your voice. What wouldst thou beg, Laertes? So basically he says, there's nothing of reason that you can ask of me that I will not freely give you. And then he says, that shall not be my offer, not thy asking. The head is more native to the heart, the hand more instrumental to the mouth. When he says the head is more native to the heart and the hand more instrumental to the mouth, he's talking about Polonius. And he says, then is the throne of Denmark to thy father. So thy father is Polonius. So he's saying that Polonius is my right-hand man. I owe him a lot. There is nothing that I won't give you if it's reasonable. And then he says, what wouldst thou have, Laertes? And then Laertes goes, dread my lord, your leave and favour to return to France, from whence thou willingly I came to Denmark, to show my duty in your coronation. So Laertes just wants to go back to school. He's like, hey, I miss old France. There's a lot of good times down there. I just want to go back to school. And he goes, yet now I must confess that duty done. I came to the coronation. I came to your wedding. I want to go. And the king says, have you your father's leave? What says Polonius? And here we have our first lines from Polonius. Like when the king asks, does he have your leave? Polonius could have very easily have said, yeah, he can go. Scoot, scat, shoo, get out, Laertes. But he doesn't. Polonius, we are going to learn, is extremely long-winded. He likes to hear himself talk a lot. So we kind of pick that up here in his first line. He hath, my lord, wrung from me my slow leave by laborsome petition, and at last upon his will I sealed my hard consent. I do beseech you, give him leave to go. King, take thy fair hour, Laertes, time be thine, and thy best graces spend it at thy will. But now, my cousin Hamlet and my son. Now, on stage you see Hamlet and he's sulky. He's like not having this. He does not want to be there. He's like emo Hamlet. He wants none of it. He's in black. He's like, ugh. He's so sad. He makes that noise. Ugh. A lot. So Hamlet's like super sad. But when you see the stage direction, it says aside. That means that he's just kind of like saying it, to himself, to us. And he goes, a little more than kin and less than kind. So when he says a little more than kin, because he calls him my cousin Hamlet and my son, Hamlet's saying, yeah, we're a little too kin at this point. We're a little too related. And then he says, and less than kind, which means I really don't think you're top-notch, Claudius. I think you're a jerk. So that's a really clever thing, a little more than kin and less than kind. And then the king looks at him and goes, how is it that the clouds still hang on you? Because I told you, Hamlet's like pulling a full-on emo. He's like, making all those noises. And then Hamlet goes, not so, my lord. I am too much in the sun. Oh, I love that line. When he says, I am too much in the sun, it means a couple of things. First of all, son can also be spelled S-O-N, which means Hamlet's like, I'm too many people's sons at this point. I'm now my uncle's son. I was my father's son. I'm too much in the sun. So that's pretty cool. Also, back in medieval times, people thought that if you got too much sun, that it would cause melancholy. So, of course, if you're walking around all in black, listening to The Cure all day, people think you're sad. So, too much in the sun. Then the queen has put her 2 cents in, and she's like, good Hamlet, cast thy nighty colour off, and let thine eye look like a friend on Denmark. Do not for ever with thy veiled lids seek for thy noble father in the dust. Thou knowest 'tis common all that lives must die, passing through nature to eternity. This is terrible. Especially because you guys don't know yet how much time has passed between the funeral, the death of King Hamlet, and their marriage. You will. I'm not going to spoiler alert it. But the queen's like, YOLO, get over it, Hamlet. Right? So she's like real nonchalant about it. She's like, it's common. People die all the time. Get over it. Right? So then Hamlet looks at her and he goes, aye, madam, it is common. This people dying, people passing, it is common. And then Queen goes, if it be, why seems it so particular with thee? So she's like, well, if it's common, then why are you continuing to be this way? Why does it seem that you are so sad? And Hamlet jumps on this. He goes, seems, madam? Nay, it is. I know not seems. So he's like, no, madam, it doesn't seem that I am sad. It does not seem that I am heartbroken. It does not seem that I cannot get over this. It is. And then he drives it home. He says, 'tis not alone in my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solid black. So And he goes, nor windy suspiration of forced breath. So he's walking around. Now when you're sad, you do that. Evidently in Shakespeare's time, that's called a windy suspiration of forced breath. And he goes, no, nor the fruitful river in thy eye. So fruitful river, like he's crying, like a lot, like rivers of tears. Nor the dejected haviour of the visage. Visage is French for face. So he's like haviour, so he's like sad, downtrodden, scowly face. And he goes, together with all forms, moods, show of grief that can denote me truly. So he's like, yes, these things are apparent on me. I'm black, I'm sad, I'm, my face is down, I'm making huffy noises. And he's like, yes, these seem to be symptoms of great grief. And he says, for they are actions that a man might play. He says, but I have that within which passeth show, these but the trappings and the suits of woe. So he's like, yeah, anybody can pretend to be sad, anybody can do these things. And he's like, but they do not seem with me, they are with me, I am broken. And so Hamlet has this really emotional sort of just bearing of his soul. And then Uncle Stepdaddy just pops in and he's like, 'tis sweet and commendable in your nature, Hamlet, to give these mourning duties to your father. But you must know your father lost a father, and that father lost his, and the survivor bound in filial obligation for some term to do obsequious sorrow, but to persevere in obstinate condolement is a course of impious stubbornness. So he's like, if you keep being sad, you're just being stubborn and awful, because this has happened to people for generations. People have lost their fathers since the beginning of time, and you're just being stubborn. But that's not enough. He can't just say that he's stubborn. He goes one further, and he says, 'tis unmanly grief. Totally tries to emasculate him here. And then, if that wasn't enough, then he goes, it shows a will most incorrect to heaven. So he's like, now God's angry. You're being stubborn. You're crying like a girl. And God doesn't like it. Right? A heart unfortified, a mind impatient, an understanding simple and unschooled. For what we know must be, and is as common as any the most vulgar thing to sense. Why should we in our peevish opposition take it to heart? Fie, 'tis a fault to heaven, a fault against the dead, a fault to nature, to reason most absurd, whose common theme is death of fathers, and who still hath cried from the first course till he that died today. This must be so. So basically he's like, this has to happen. This will happen. Get over yourself. And then he continues, we pray you, throw to earth this unprevailing woe, and think of us as of a father. So he's basically like, I'm your new daddy now. Don't you worry, Hamlet. For let the world take note, you are the most immediate to our throne, and with no less nobility of love than that which dearest father bears his son do I impart towards you. For your intent in going back to school in Wittenberg, it is most retrograde to our desire. So there are a couple of things we need to think about here. First of all, when King Hamlet died, who should have taken the throne? Prince Hamlet, right? Prince Hamlet should have taken the throne. But because Claudius so quickly jumped in there and married Gertrude, he now has the throne. So that should be our first tip, that Claudius has insidious intent. Alright? And then the second part, he just let Laertes go to school. But then he looks Hamlet in his face and goes, nah, we don't want you to go back to school. And he continues, and we beseech you, bend you to remain here in the cheer and comfort of our eye. Our chiefest courtier, cousin, and our son. Now we have to think here, why do you think Claudius would want to keep Hamlet close? Hold that thought. Alright, so then the queen comes in. Let not thy mother lose her prayers, Hamlet. I pray thee stay with us. Go not to Wittenberg. And then Hamlet, I shall in all my best obey you, madam. And then the king, why, 'tis a loving and a fair reply. Be as ourself in Denmark. Madam, come. This gentle and unforced accord of Hamlet sits smiling to my heart. Gentle and unforced accord. Now, if the king tells Hamlet he can't go back to school, he can't go back to school. To me, that feels pretty forced, but, that might just be me. And then he goes, sits smiling to my heart, in grace whereof no jocund health that Denmark drinks today. But the great cannon to the clouds shall tell, and the kings rouse the heavens shall brood again, re-speaking earthly thunder. Come away. So basically, king's like, let's get turned. So they're ready to have a party. They're like, we're going to get drunk. We're going to party. Everything's great. I've got my new wife here. I'm Uncle Stepdaddy now. This is great. So Claudius, the king, is on top of the world now. Everybody leaves the scene except Hamlet. And we have our first soliloquy. So perhaps one of the most famous things about Hamlet, the play, are the soliloquies. We all love this soliloquy. So here's our first one. Hamlet's heartbroken. Hamlet does not want to live anymore. He's spent. He's done. And so we have Hamlet. And he starts out with, oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. Holy garbage. That is some sadness, that he just wants to physically just melt into nothingness and disappear, right? And then he goes, or that the everlasting had not fixed his canon against self-slaughter. So suicide, that it wasn't, a mortal sin to commit suicide. And he's like, oh God, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seems to me all the uses of this world. So he's like, there's nothing on this world that is good anymore. And then he goes, how, fie, aunt, oh fie, 'tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed things rank and gross, and nature possesses it merely. So he's talking about the world as just a big giant ball of nasty weeds, and nothing good grows on it, nothing beautiful or lovely. It's just a bunch of gnarly weeds, and he hates it. He's sad, right? And so then he goes, that it should come to this, but 2 months dead. What? It's only been 2 months. King Hamlet has only been dead 2 months. That's not very long. That's awful. Can you imagine? I mean, it's already sad enough that Hamlet's father's dead, but now we learned that his mother married within 2 months. Poor Hamlet. Nay, not so much, not 2, so 2-ish. So excellent a king that was to this, Hyperion to a satyr. So now he's comparing Claudius to his father, a Hyperion to a satyr. And then he thinks about his father and he goes, oh, so loving to my mother, that he might not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Oh, heaven and earth must I remember. Why, she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on. So his parents were evidently quite in love, and they were very affectionate with one another, and he's like saying it's almost as if hugging him or being near him made her even want to be closer to him. Like it was never satiated, her love for him. And then he goes, by what it fed on, and yet within a month, let me not think on it. And then we have this very favorite famous line, frailty, thy name is woman. So we see here that Hamlet is very cognizant. He's blaming his mother in her weakness, in her frailty. A little month or ere those shoes were old within which she followed my poor father's body, like Niobe, all tears. Why, even she, O God, a beast that wants discourse of reason would have mourned longer, married with mine uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules, within a month. So, whenever he's talking about her shoes, he's basically saying that the shoes that she wore in the funeral, they weren't even old when she wore them to walk down the aisle. And then he draws the parallel between a beast like a cow would have mourned longer for its lost cow spouse. Cow spouse. That's funny. But that a cow would have mourned longer than its mother did. Like, she's so base. That's disgusting. And then again, he compares himself to Hercules, and like that's the difference between Claudius and King Hamlet. And then he goes, ere yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left the flushing in her galled eyes, she married. So he's like, the tears at the funeral, their eyes were still slightly red when she walked down the aisle to marry, because there wasn't enough time that had went by. And then she goes, she married, oh, most wicked speed to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. It is not, nor it cannot come to good, but break my heart, for I must hold my tongue. This is a bad place for Hamlet to be in. This is terrible. So Hamlet's heartbroken. He wants to die. He's stuck in a terrible position. But at this point, Horatio, Marcellus, and Bernardo run in. And we know what they want to tell him, right? Yeah, we do. Horatio, hell to your lordship. And Hamlet, if you'll notice, like, he completely does a 180. He, like, sees his BFF, and he's like, oh, I'm glad to see you well, Horatio, or I do forget myself. And then Horatio's like, same, my lord, and your poor servant ever. And he goes, sir, my good friend, I'll change that name with you. So when he says, sir, I'll change that name with you, and Horatio calls himself a poor servant, Hamlet's like, no, I'll be your poor servant. You're like the best friend I have. So they give a bit of a bromance there. And then Marcellus is like, Marcellus is like, my good lord. And Hamlet's like, oh, I'm very glad to see you too. Good evening, sir. And then he goes, but what in faith makes you from Wittenberg? And Horatio's kind of cutting up. He goes, a true disposition, good my lord. So he's like, I'm out being, getting rowdy. And Hamlet goes, I would not hear your enemies say so, nor shall you do my ear that violence to make it truster of your own report against yourself. I know you are no truant. So what he does is, Horatio's making a joke. He's like, I'm out being, I'm getting in trouble and being, I don't know, a truant. And Hamlet goes, don't call yourself that. Don't call yourself a truant. You're not a truant. And if I ever heard anybody call you a truant, I never want to hear you say that. So Hamlet, takes it to a very serious level. And so then Hamlet's trying to lighten it again. He says, but what is your affair in Elsinore? We'll teach you to drink deep ere you depart. So then Hamlet's kind of like, we're going to get a little drunk. We're going to get a little turned tonight. And then Horatio goes, my lord, I came to see your father's funeral. Now, of course, this totally takes Hamlet's mood down. And Hamlet goes, I prithee do not mock me, fellow student. I think it was to see my mother's wedding. Because Hamlet's sassy. And then Horatio goes, indeed, my lord, it followed hard upon. So it followed very closely. And then Hamlet goes, thrift, Horatio, the funeral baked meats did coldly furnish forth the marriage tables. That is some shade right there. Because he's like, no, it was cheaper to do it that way, because then we could use the leftovers from the funeral at the wedding. See how great that is? I love Shakespeare. That was awesome. So then he goes, would I had met my dearest foe in heaven, or ever I had seen the day, Horatio. My father. Methinks I see my father. Now, when Hamlet says, methinks I'd seen my father, he's just talking about, he thinks about him a lot. But Horatio, who has actually just seen the ghost of his father, is like, where, my lord? Because he thinks Hamlet has seen the ghost as well. And he's like, phew, this makes my job a lot easier. But then Hamlet goes, in my mind's eye, Horatio. So he thinks about him. He sees him. He's missing him. He's remembering. He's having memories of him. And then Horatio goes, I saw him once. He was a goodly king. And then Hamlet goes, he was a man. Take him for all in all. I shall not look upon his like again. And then Horatio kind of slips it in. He's like, my lord, I think I saw him yesternight. And then Hamlet's not really following. He goes, saw who? Right? So he's not quite following the pattern here. And then Horatio goes, my lord, the king your father. And of course, Hamlet's taken back, the king my father. And Horatio goes, season your admiration for a while, so hold your disbelief for a moment, with an attent ear, till I may deliver upon the witnesses of these gentlemen this marvel to you. So Horatio's like, just listen. And then Hamlet's like, for God's love, let me hear. And then Horatio recounts the night that they saw the King Hamlet, that he was armed at point exactly cap a pie, which means head to toe in the armor. And he was on a solemn march throughout the battlement, and that they were so scared that they could not speak to him. And so they told Horatio, and they brought Horatio up, and he said, and I with them the third night kept the watch, whereas they had delivered both in time form of the thing, each word made true and good. The apparition comes, I knew your father, these hands are not more like. So he's like, I've seen the ghost, and it was your father. And he uses that great analogy where he's like, these hands are not more like mine. Like, seeing my own hands, I recognize these. Just as much as when I saw that ghost, I recognized your father. And then Hamlet goes, but where was this? And he goes, upon the platform where we watched. And Hamlet's like, did you not speak to it? Horatio goes, my lord, I did, but answer made it none. Yet once methought it lifted up its head, and did address itself to motion, like as it would speak. But even then the morning cock crew loud, and at that sound it shrunk in haste away, and vanished from our sight. Hamlet goes, 'tis very strange. And Horatio, as I do live, my honored lord, 'tis true, and we did think it writ down in our duty to let you know of it. And then Hamlet's like, indeed, sirs, but this troubles me. Hold you the watch tonight? Marcellus and Bernardo in unison, we do, my lord. And Hamlet, armed, you say? Armed, my lord, from top to toe, my lord, from head to foot. Then Hamlet goes, then saw you not his face? Because if you'll think about, like, armor, it has the little hat, a little hat. And he goes, yes, my lord, he wore his beaver up. So the beaver is the little shield. You know, when you think of a suit of armor, you know, the little whoop, whoop part, the beaver is up. So they saw his face. And then Hamlet goes, what looked he frowningly? It makes me sad, because Hamlet wants to know if his father's sad or how he felt. But Horatio says that it accounts more in sorrow than in anger. And then Hamlet goes, pale or red? Now, this is an important question, because anytime a ghost comes on the scene in Shakespearean England, the thing you need to figure out is it a demon who's trying to take me to hell, or is it a ghost trying to give me buried treasure or, you know, hang out? So, he needed to decide these things. Evidently, if he was red, he was a demon. So, that's what he's asking. And then Hamlet goes, and fixed his eyes upon you, and he goes, most constantly. And Hamlet goes, I would I had been there. It makes me sad. And Horatio goes, it would have much amazed you. And then Hamlet, very like, stayed it long. And then while one with moderate haste might tell 100, that basically means if somebody would have stood there and counted to 100, that's about how long they stayed. And then Marcellus and Bernardo are like, longer. And then Horatio goes, well, not the time I saw it. And then Hamlet goes, his beard was grizzled, And grizzled is like gray, like specks of gray in it. And then Horatio goes, it was as if I'd seen it in his life, as sable silvered. And then Hamlet goes, I will watch tonight, perchance 'twill walk again. And Horatio goes, I warrant it will. So I bet it will. And then Hamlet goes, if it assume my noble father's person, I'll speak to it, though hell itself should gape and bid me hold my peace. So Hamlet's fired up. And he goes, I pray you all, if you have hitherto concealed this sight, let it be tenable in your silence still. So he's like, if you guys haven't told anybody about this ghost, keep that up. Don't tell anybody about what you have seen. And he says, give it an understanding but no tongue. I will requite your loves. So fare you well upon the platform. 'Twixt 11 and 12 I'll visit you. And they're like, our duty to your honor. And then Hamlet goes, your love is mine to you, farewell. And then Horatio, Marcellus, and Bernardo exit. And then Hamlet stands there alone. And he is in awe of the news that he has just heard. And he says, my father's spirit in arms, fully decked out in armor. He goes, all is not well. So he comes to the same conclusion as Horatio, that this is a bad omen. And he goes, I doubt some foul play would the night were come. Till then sit still my soul, foul deeds will rise, though all the earth o'erwhelm them to men's eyes. So we have that beautiful couplet at the end of Hamlet's little aside here. So that is Act 1, Scene 2. So, so suspenseful. Will Hamlet see his ghost? Will the ghost speak to him? I know, but you don't. So, we'll find out in the next video. All right. Okay, we'll see you next time.